Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Anime Brain Freeze. We are your frosty hosts.
I am John.
And I'm CC. And this is a show where we review all the anime series from the previous season we did and didn't watch start to finish. So after a couple of pretty long shows, this will be our first shorter episode, breather maybe, in quite a while, with only 2 reviews. Although, I don't know about you, John, but I got a lot to say about my chosen series, so...
I think I have enough to say. I mean, we might sidetrack a little bit, but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Because of very current events and developments.
Because of unfortunate reasons.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see. Anyway, first John is gonna tell us if true love can bloom even in an online game with his review for Recovery of an MMO Junkie. And then I will talk about the unconventional superhero tale of Inuyashiki. So grab yourself a warm blanket to ward off the cold and get cozy. We'll be right back.
Right, so first up we're going to talk about Recovery of an MMO Junkie. So this show is all about this 30-year-old lady, Moriko Morioka. She's unemployed for the first time since graduating high school, and she couldn't be happier about it. She was living the corporate life and just hating it for about 11 years. And after she quits, she quickly turns to online games to pass her free time now. Yay.
Haven't we all been there?
She reinvents herself as the dashing hero Hayashi in the MMO Fruit de Mer.
Okay.
Yes, some French-named Japanese MMO. Sure.
Is it a classic fantasy MMO, or are there special things about it?
It's, as far as I can tell, just a standard, fair MMO.
Okay.
If you like your free-to-play games...
No.
But yes, with all of these pesky societal obligations of the real world out of the way, just gone, she dives headfirst into the game where she basically throws herself headlong at this one encounter, and she keeps just getting beaten to shit and she can't win. But she...
Farming Nergiganta. I've been there recently.
She meets this kind and cute healer girl named Lily, and they befriend each other almost instantly, and they become inseparable. She joins up with Lily's guild, the At-Home Party. That's at as in, the symbol at, because...
Yeah. Clever.
So, Moriko adopts this reclusive lifestyle and ventures out from the safety of her apartment only when it's absolutely necessary. The true shut-in neat life, the elite neat life. Unknown to Moriko, there's this 28-year-old corporate worker named Yuta Sakurai who is also logged into the same game. They coincidentally bump into each other at a convenience store one night. They write off their meeting as no more than just a chance encounter with a stranger. But there's more to that than they think. So,
can I make a wild assumption here?
Go on.
Is he like the girl she met on the game?
How did you know?
Wow. I mean, it's not problematic that is not surprising. I'm just wondering if they go anywhere with that.
I mean, a lot of the story beats in the show are largely predictable, but that's fine because the show is definitely more about the interactions between the characters than it is the overarching plot. We know from the moment these two characters meet that there's going to be something between them, and the way their relationship develops across the 10 episodes of the show it feels meaningful and interesting. There's been a lot of these shows recently. There was another one in the same season that I'm going to touch on next week that had shorter episode counts, but it felt like they were able to manifest their story a lot better in that shorter time. So I don't know, it just struck me as weird that, these shorter shows seem to be able to more succinctly do what the longer shows cannot.
I guess it all comes down to, how much of story and development that story wants to tell and how, focused the vision of the creators is. And I guess for this one, it was pretty good.
Yeah, it definitely was. Basically, obviously, if you couldn't tell, Moriko and Yuta end up together after trials and tribulations. Just I don't feel like that's a spoiler because you figure it out pretty early on what's going on. There's other intricacies to their relationship that hey, they somehow kind of knew each other from playing a previous game, but they didn't know who each other were back then. But through talking and figuring things out, they sort of learned, a whole lot about each other. One thing that's really good about this show that a lot of other shows, gamers, seem to get very wrong about, with misunderstandings is that, hey, if you talk things out, you'll be able to work things through. And this show does that. It does
amazing.
That really well.
Oh, that sounds so refreshing.
And I want to. I think it's because this show is targeted at an older audience. Moriko is in her 30s, Yuta is in his late 20s. So having this goofy teenage BS that a lot of these shows and manga and stories seem to love doing, just doing something a little more refreshing and not as off the walls it's nice. Yeah, it's nice for once.
Sounds more grounded and, more akin to a realistic relationship.
Yes. It's not, we're just going to keep, throwing this junk around because it's funny, haha, gamers.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I also think that teenagers throwing a hissy fit over every small minuscule bullshit is very realistic. But
it is.
But it's refreshing to see a show that is geared toward a more grown-up audience who come to terms with their feelings and everything. So,
And I sort of feel like while watching this show that, this is more of the type of romance story that I'd like to watch moving forward. Because, I'm not a fucking teenager anymore. Neither of us are. So it becomes harder to relate. And I hate using the word relate or relatable because that's sort of become a stupid meme now. Mm-hmm. But the story is relatable for people our age in their late 20s, early to mid 30s. So does this mean that John is actually moving past the high school rom-coms?
No, I believe it when I see it.
I feel like maybe because there's another show this season that we talked about in the sneak preview that I sort of ended up tossing aside because of that. We'll get to that, though.
I mean, it's there can still be really good romance shows set in high school, I guess, and one of those hits you might be interested again. And I won't even try to attempt escaping the clutches of teenage shonen hero shows because that's never gonna happen.
But action shows are fun because they have that big flash and they're there to catch your attention and drag you in with all of that.
Yeah, but if it's all about a relationship that you cannot relate to, or that you cannot find yourself into or can't imagine yourself being in that place, you're right. Then it's probably harder to stick with that. At least if there's an alternative in that kind of genre. And apparently, MMO Junkie, delivered that kind of alternative.
Oh, definitely. I kind of slept on this show for about half of the season, and then I didn't quite binge it all in one day, maybe in like 2.5 days. But I'm glad I didn't pass it up entirely because I think it's definitely worth watching because, like I said, there's not many romance stories of this flavor. The last one that I can really remember was Servant Service, which was a workplace set rom-com that was actually written and worked on by a lot of the crew that did Working. So, it had its spiritual grown-up successor in that show, which was kind of neat.
I mean, right now, After the Rain might be something that goes more into that direction, but I can't be sure about it because I only watched the first episode. So, I don't know. Maybe see how that develops.
Yeah, I mean, but when we talked about it in the sneak preview, I remember looking at the description of the show, like the huge gap in ages between the characters and thinking,
it can go horribly wrong, but, just judging from the first episode, it seemed like a kind of innocent approach to this. However well that might work out in the end, but,
Yeah, and I mean, I remember, and I've seen a lot of people talking about, like, on Twitter and on social media that, it is a good story and a good show. I don't know. Maybe I'll look it up at some point. I don't know about you, but I have so many backlog shows, shows that I want to watch before I die.
Yes. There's a lot. Even when you're like put out of commission in terms of work for like 2 weeks and should be able to catch up on a lot of anime stuff, there's always other stuff coming up that keeps you from catching up on that backlog, at least in a significant way. But
there's always current shows. There's always something on Netflix or on TV or on this or on that.
Or other media that you want to consume, game-wise and stuff like that. Yeah, but let's go back to the other junkies. So we talked about gamers earlier and, what the shortcomings were compared to this in terms of its romance. So how does MMO Junkie fare in terms of its setting, which is, the online gaming world? Does the story make enough use of that in a creative way, or is it just decoration like it was in Gamers?
It actually, sticks to its core theme of, hey, these people play a game and that's how they bonded and got to know each other. And we see them playing the game and talking about it. And it's just like, yes, this is a core theme you established from the start and you kept with it. It's not like games where it's like, oh, we're a bunch of loser nerds who like video games, but fuck video games. We're not going to talk about them anymore. Like, I think while we were talking about it and I was reforming my opinion on it, that's what really bugs me about the show, that, they couldn't even stick to their core theme. Yeah. Whereas with this, they hit on it, they hammer it down, and it's like, yes, this is a large part of the show.
Good.
And, we see them playing it, but the interesting thing about this show is it was worked on by the studio Signal MD, and they've worked on stuff like Adam the Beginning, one of the Cyborg 009 movies, and that movie Napping Princess.
Okay.
It's clear, it's quite clear that this show didn't have much budget. However, they used it really well, because this isn't a show where you need to have a big sweeping scenes of like amazing Sakuga. No, you just establish that they're playing the game, show them in the game, show them talking about it. They made it work for, they didn't overstep what they were trying to go for. I think that's the best way to word it.
Okay. So, when there are shortcuts, they are not really that noticeable.
Right.
Or they're put in the right place where they don't matter that much.
Right. Like, even the intro sequence, it's very simplistic, but it works so well. Like, there's even a part in there where you see what is essentially the game's character creator, and you see like the sliders moving back and forth and the options changing and the character appearances change. It's again, matches with the theme, and it looks really cool, and it works so well.
Mm-hmm. So the female protagonist chooses a male avatar, and the male protagonist chooses a female avatar in the game. And I assume it takes some time for them getting a clue, that the people on the other end is the opposite gender of the avatar they chose. And I guess that's where some of the comedy comes in.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. So, I mean, is that like extended to I wouldn't call it unbearable, but to a ridiculous amount of time? Or is there like a point in the show where they say, okay, we've done enough with this and now we clue the characters in and, try to develop the relationship further? Yeah,
they don't dwell on it too hard. They're like, oh, wait, that's you, sort of thing. And then they move on. And then they move on from it. Well, let's be real. In real life, when people play MMOs, how often do you choose your? How often do people play an opposite gender? I mean, I know I do in Final Fantasy XIV. So
yeah, weirdly enough, I don't do that often myself. I don't know why. Because it's like I can see the appeal. But it's like, okay, this is like, for me, those games where you can choose your own characters always self-insert. And so I always really try to pick a character that kind of looks like me and try to imagine myself being in that world and stuff like that.
It kind of depends on the game for me. Like, I know it just sort of dawned on me to do that back when I started playing FF14. So I kind of ran with that. There's some other games, and it doesn't really matter as much in this, but I play a male character in the Souls games, and I say it doesn't really matter because your face is going to be covered up with armor. So
yeah, I think I've heard the most most blunt reason that made most sense to me. I heard from a friend who said, "Hey man, if I'm gonna look at the ass of a character in the game, like for the entirety of that game, I might as well make it a hot girl." So I'm like, yeah, okay, I can get that. I can see where you're coming from. So
yeah, I've heard that argument.
So yeah, I guess that's one side of the argument. Yeah, but I was just wondering if the show, would be doing anything else, beyond the comedy angle with that, or if that's just there for the initial confusion and keeping the characters, a bit apart from each other in the beginning, and cluing them in right from the beginning who is the other character, and making the developing romance a bit more, interesting that way. So I guess that was like the main reason why they chose to do that.
Yeah, pretty much. I think before we start talking about staff, because it's kind of important that we get to that. My only real big complaint is that some of the side characters got pushed to the side a bit, and they didn't really get developed as much. Like the three, big main characters that we get to know are obviously Moriko, Yuta, and one of Yuta's work friends who was just there to be, a shithead for no real good reason. This guy Kanbei.
Funny shithead? Is he like someone to bounce like Yuta's thoughts off from, or?
I think his role in the show was basically to be the impetus to get Yuta to act on his feelings.
Okay.
Basically, because he kind of taunts him a bit. Like, hey, what if I ended up with her? Huh? And Yuta's like, yeah, I don't want that to happen.
So he spurts him into action. By
pretty
being
much
kind of an ass. Okay. All right. Well, is it well-meaning or is he serious? Like, does he want to snatch her from Yuta, or is he like, I'm doing this to like get this guy out of his fucking chair and do something about the way he feels?
It comes across as very much the latter. So.
Oh, that's nice. I mean, then he's a good guy underneath. So.
I mean, he still acts like kind of Pinhead. Because of who he is. Like, the character that he makes in game is a very masculine lady, like just this huge frame, like bruiser of a lady. It's like, oh, Jesus.
Okay.
It's funny. So, I mean, we get to see some of the other members of the guild, and there's some level of interaction with them, but not a whole lot. Like, one of them we get to know works at, conveniently enough, the convenience store that Yuta and Moriko go to. How about that? And then two of the others are like husband and wife, but we don't, it's not really much beyond that on their front. I sort of wish that they had done a bit more, but
probably the only thing I was criticizing about Dragon Maid, that some of the side characters were like getting the shaft in terms of developing and everything. But hey, at least there's some interaction and not only one episode like with the game club and gamers, right? Anyway, I mean, we're gonna beat that horse until it resurrects as a zombie, but
gamers will be the eternal rom-com whipping boy. So
yes, at least for us. I mean, there are enough people who like that show, but still. Anyway, sorry, continue.
No problem. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the staff before we move on. The original creator is Rin Kokuyo, and apparently this is her one big work. So I'm interested to see what she does in the future.
So wait, is the manga completely finished, or is it still running? Or
yeah, apparently the manga is still running. So
okay, but is the story in the anime like finished in a way, or does it feel like okay, there's more coming?
I mean, it feels like they reached a logical end point, but
okay.
If they wanted to do more with it, I'm sure they could find a way. The composition and script was done by Kazuyuki Fudeyasu, who has quite a bit of work under his belt. Stuff like Bento, Black Clover, Beach, Girls Last Tour, Hajime no Ippo, Hetalia, JoJo, Kaiji, Magical Warfare, a whole bunch of other stuff. Like the body of his work is pretty vast and wide, actually. And given that I've seen at least some of that other stuff, his work is pretty good. So I'm glad to see they did more good work in this show.
Yes.
One of the real stars of the staff is the musician Hiroaki Konishi. Goes by a performance name of Konish. And I haven't had a chance to talk about him yet. He's done work on stuff like Appleseed 13, Marduk Scramble, and the best part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal is the music.
Some people would say it's the only good part.
I mean, yeah. But no, his compositions are amazing. I don't know if you've ever heard any of the music from Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal.
No, I don't think so.
When we're done recording, I'll have to link you to some.
Please do.
But yeah, his music is really good, really like very orchestral, like sweeping orchestra sort of sound. So, when you start hearing it, he has a very unique sound. As soon as I heard the music, I was like, wait a second.
So it's a very recognizable style, pretty much like, I can always pick out Hiroyuki Sawano whenever he is in a fucking show.
Yeah, I feel like another composer that I can usually really easily pick out in the same way is Yoko Shimomura, because after you've heard, the soundtrack to Kingdom Hearts, I remember hearing the soundtrack to Radiant Historia when it was coming out, and I was like, yeah, that's Shimomura. She has a similar sound, but, it's really good, so go with what you know, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, some people always say, oh, one trick pony, blah, 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 and always doing the same kind of soundtrack. People have saying that for Kajiura as well, also a composer that you can immediately pick out. But, like I've said before, with these composers who adhere to a specific style and who are very recognizable, if that is a good style and it's very good and well produced and composed music, then why would I care if it sounds kind of sameish? Because
right.
It's just more great music. So why would you complain about that?
Exactly. Yeah. Last on our list is the director, Kazuyoshi Yaginuma. His one big other directorial credit is some OVA called Digital Juice, and he's done episode direction on other shows. Yeah, hold on to that. Hold on to that. He's done episode direction on other shows like Beck, Boku no, From the New World, Pokemon Generations, and Yama no Susume. So this is like his second big major directorial credit. But we're not going to talk about that right now. What we're going to talk about is how on Twitter he seems to have openly expressed a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric, and that's really colored my opinion of him, and not for the good.
Yeah, that's really a shame, especially considering that, how much you like the show, and, how many people like this show. Like I've heard until now, until this came up, until this happened, which was this week, the only positive things came out of this show and sounded really good. And even though I'm not, interested in romance anime, it sounded like, maybe I should go back and watch this show. But, now this came out, and some people have, first when those tweets appeared where he, really openly uttered anti-Semitic thoughts, people were, questioning, maybe because he wasn't initially tweeting in English, and he's only recently started, conversing in English, or with his English followers. And people were questioning, maybe, because it's not his native language, because maybe he wasn't really sure what he was saying. But, if you look at his Japanese tweet, which people have been doing since then, if you look at some of his Japanese tweets, he has been saying basically the same things in Japanese, and it's really vile stuff. It's, he's retweeting anti-Semitic statements from other people on Twitter, and, specific, anti-Semitic cartoons. He has been denying the Holocaust and questioning the existence of gas chambers. He's been saying the Japanese anime industry is hopeless because it's being made Jewish, whatever the fuck that means.
Yeah, I started to read that stuff and I was like, okay, all right. I understand that, the animation industry is tough. But what? Yeah,
at least he seems like a giant idiot, if not a giant piece of garbage and waste of oxygen. So, that's problematic. Like I said, considering how much you like the show, how much people like this show, and if you do that, and you are a decent human being, what do you do in face of such a development? Like, what would you do? We up till now you said man, this is a show I would recommend, but
yes.
After this, what is your stance? Like, what are you gonna do?
That's tough because I do think this is an excellent show and worth watching. I guess the balance I could strike is moving forward. If he somehow still has a job in the industry after all of this, I would not watch anything he has a hand in ever again, just to make that point.
And I guess, you can always say, of course, there's not only one person involved in the making of an anime, and it would be unfair to the other people who are involved in the production of the show, the composer who is great, and, script writer and everything. Would be unfair to not give the show, the recognition it deserves for what it does, but at least you should always keep in mind what one of the main executives of the show is and what he said, and maybe reconsider watching the show and reading the manga instead, because at least the creator of the manga so far apparently seems to be a decent human being. At least I have not heard anything of the opposite kind. So yeah, if you are interested in that story, maybe consider and you plan to invest money in it or something, into watching it or seeing it or experiencing that story, maybe buy the manga instead of paying for the anime or something like that. And when you like the show, if you watch the show and want to sing the praises of the show, please also mention or keep in mind that one of the creators of that show doesn't seem to be a good person, because he should not get any recognition for this work. Not at all. If there's a chance, if there's a possibility to do that, just completely erase him from the staff and everything, and whatever recognition that show gets in terms of awards or something, he should not be included in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's shitty when things like that happen, because they harm, they threw shade at an otherwise apparently great product, a great show, something that people enjoy, and something that brought happiness and fun to people's lives, which I think it did to yours, John. So
definitely.
Yeah. So it's like, it doesn't feel like it's the kind of sentiment that works with the moral and the message of this story, which seems to be like love finds a way, which is like, yeah, that's not what I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of fucking the Holocaust. And
no, definitely not.
So, and denying such a thing. And, for me, it's like stuff like that always hits really home, not because I'm Jewish, but because my country, because I hail from Germany, and my country was responsible for that shit. And I'm really allergic to people like denying that this stuff happened and talking about this stuff like it was like, some harmless occurrence that, should be questioned, that should be questioned in terms of its accuracy or the events that happened and how they were portrayed. And I've seen so many documentaries. We have like, I talked about this when I talked about in one of our sneak peek about Dies Irae, which was a show that was really, was using Nazi iconography and people from real World War II history on the German side who were monsters, and making them the kind of cool-ish anti-hero villains of the show, and glorifying them, and that like really pushed my buttons.
Yeah, you had many things to say.
Yeah, so yeah, stuff like that just gets to me, and when people from don't have to be from Germany, when people from other countries, and he's from Japan, who were obviously part of the of the war and part of the alliance with Germany. But if, even people from other countries, doesn't really matter. If someone is like, this, why did Anne Frank really tell the truth? And like, fuck you, man. Get out of here. Like, seriously, just shit like that I can't let stand, because that stuff really happened, and it's like, it's a dark part of the history of my country, and I don't want it to be, unlike other people, some people even still in this country, I don't want this story to disappear in the ether of history, because I definitely don't want it to be repeated. Mm-hmm. And anyone who thinks that this that this should be repeated, or that this didn't happen, can go fuck off. So yeah, and that goes to the director of the show.
I mean, he seems to have created his own echo chamber where he's liking and retweeting everyone who's agreeing with him and saying, he's telling it like it is. And it's like, no, don't. Let me just say this. Next time you're thinking about being a racist douchebag, maybe don't.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. Yes, exactly. Especially if you are responsible for a great show, and that show now takes harm from your shitty attitude, even though it shouldn't, because it's a good show and it's worth watching and everything, and a lot of other good people worked on it, and it tales from a good manga apparently. So yeah, I don't know what we should leave the audience with, John. It's like, do you have a final word?
I mean, what you mentioned about maybe reading the manga instead is a pretty good idea, but if you do want to watch the show, just keep that in mind in the back of your head.
Ichiro Inuyashiki doesn't have a great life. He's 58 years old, but looks at least 80. He has a boring job. He's very soft-spoken and thus often ignored. He doesn't make a lot of money, lives in a small house, and his family doesn't like him. Some parts of his family because of that reason. Not money, small house. And then one day his doctor tells him that Inuyashiki has cancer and not much longer to live. So to say he's down on his luck would be kind of an understatement. When walking his dog Hanako in the evening, probably the only living being appreciating him, he suddenly gets struck by an explosion.
Oh.
Apparently that explosion was caused by accident by some random aliens who can think of only one solution for fixing their giant fuck-up, and that is transferring Inuyashiki's consciousness into a brand new cyborg body. But since they seem to be an incognito military ship, the only bodies they have lying around are the fully equipped combat versions. So when Ichiro wakes up, he finds himself suddenly the most powerful weapon on Earth, and he doesn't have to wait long to make use of his new abilities. A homeless man living in the park is being beat up by a bunch of kid hooligans and calls for help, and Inuyashiki hears it and steps in. He fends off the little assholes and thus begins his journey to becoming the most unlikely superhero ever. But, as we all know, every hero story needs a villain, and Ichiro has no idea how deeply his origin and that of his destined nemesis are intertwined. Alright, so this anime is based on a manga by Hiroya Oku. You might not be familiar with that name, but you have probably heard of at least one of his other works, and that is Gantz. A series I did not like, for many reasons. And I wasn't aware he was the original creator behind this story when I watched the first episode. Back then I thought, hey, here is this weird, goofy little story about an old man who becomes a superhero. This sounds fun. And it looked fun. It was like, okay, this is wacky with the aliens and the shit, and then he, steps in to defend the homeless man and against the ridiculous evil kid hooligans, and they attack him with fireworks, and he's like, ow, ah, and it was super funny. It was wacky, it was goofy, it was fun. So it's sort of like, man, if the rest of the show is like that, I'm gonna have a good time. Had I known at that point that this was Oku's story, I would have stepped away from the first episode with a completely different attitude, and also expected a lot more bloody violence coming my way. And we get to that, but first let's get the production info out of the way. So the series is produced by Studio Mappa, who have done a lot of cool stuff. Many of stuff which I've watched, actually. They worked on the new TV series for Ushio and Tora, which I've also reviewed on our show. They also worked on the Ro anime, one of which is currently running, with Vanishing Line, which is also pretty cool. They did Hajime no Ippo Rising, third season of Hajime no Ippo, which was also really good. They worked on Kakegurui, which we talked about, which didn't live up to our expectations. Mm-hmm. But, visually was also a very interesting show. They worked on Yuri on Ice, also a show that didn't live up to my expectations, but for some people it was the greatest of all year, and at least the greatest of that season. So and they worked on TQ, a show that John watches and I think likes.
Yeah, I think they worked on the first season, and then everything after that was a Milpensi.
But that was a good season, right?
Well, it's one of those shows that's hard to call objectively good because of how absolutely ridiculous it is, but I enjoyed it.
Okay. I mean, maybe we'll talk about it more extensive at some point. But yeah, so as you can see, they've done a lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff. Inuyashiki is, at best, one of their solid offerings. The art is alright. I'm not a fan of Oku's designs, or at least how they are adapted into anime. I didn't like how Gantz looked either. So yeah, same goes here. Everything and everyone in that show has an ugliness to it, which, fits with some parts of the story, but doesn't really make it a visually appealing watch or particularly interesting to look at. Of course, it doesn't help at all that my old nemesis also reared its hideous, stiff, low FPS head in this show, and that is shitty anime CG.
Yay! I mean,
we're back. It's back. Yeah, every time Inuyashiki uses one of his abilities or otherwise transforms parts of his cyborg body, the show switches to his CG model. And boy, does that not look good. Ever. stilted, stiff, really weird motion. And you could say, yeah, he's a robot. It's supposed to look like that. No, because, he's still supposed to walk like a human because, he usually does. And that's when he is 2D animated. But because maybe it's easier and more interesting to see, to show his transformation, or it's easier to show his transformation when it's CG and everything. They did that, and it doesn't look good at all. They even used CG for the dog at one point for some reason, which makes no sense to me. Unless it would have been too hard to animate the CG Ichiro holding the leash of a 2D dog. Listen, I don't know. All I know is it looks bad. So, yeah. Show is not much of a looker. The backgrounds and interiors are alright. Some are even really good, but that's kinda it. In my opinion, MAPPA has done much better work before. The director, Shuhei Yabuta, is probably also the reason they went with partial CG, or vice versa. I don't know which decision was made first. Because he has been mostly responsible for the 3D CG animation and modeling in other shows like Attack on Titan, Cabaneri of the Iron Fortress, Jormungand, the Iron Man and Wolverine anime, Hellsing Ultimate, and Overlord. Not shows that are necessarily famous or infamous for their use of CG. Well, maybe Iron Man. That show also looked really bad. But the CG in Attack on Titan was alright. Yeah. They switched to CG Titans, or at least to one CG Titan in the second season. And that was noticeable. I mean, you noticed it too, right?
Yeah, but and I think we agreed when we talked about it.
Yeah.
That it was one of the few times that CG and TV anime had been done really well. So
yeah, because, they really use the advantages of CG, which is, you get a freedom in terms of camera movement. And, they did that really well for that those fights in Attack on Titan and those scenes where that was used. So yeah, I thought that was a good job and well directed too. And the direction of Inuyashiki isn't bad. It's easy to follow what's happening, and what little action there is, really bad CG aside, is pretty well staged. But in the end, the show still kind of looks like ass. So your enjoyment with it, at least in that regard, depends on how high your tolerance is for those kind of visual shortcomings. If you are like, okay, I don't care, like this looks good to me, the new Godzilla movie by Polygon Pictures looks good to me, which I think is a travesty, then maybe you like, you like the rest of the visuals of the show. It feels like, the character models are kind of bland, and the CG makes it look worse, and, it's really janky and stiff when it happens, and even considering that he is supposed to be a cyborg in those moments, and maybe should use move a bit differently, it doesn't help. It just doesn't look good. I guess that's the basic point for it. Mm-hmm. So, now, like I said, after watching the first episode, I expected a somewhat weird, fun superhero story that is mainly about Inuyashiki learning to use his powers, becoming a hero, gaining the respect of his family back, and learning to respect himself, and eventually maybe save the city or world or something. And yes, the show is about all of that. So I wasn't technically wrong. However, it's also a Hiroya Oku show. So this was bound to be a hyper-violent, blood-drenched, disturbing and dark series as well. And to be fair, the OP should have clued me in, because for all its glorious weirdness, it hints at enough dark stuff that I should have seen this coming immediately. The OP is great, by the way, and one of my favorite ones from last year. Also great song by Man with a Mission. Check at least that one out on YouTube or something. It's worth it. It's a good OP. So yeah, like I said, one part of the story is Inuyashiki's hero's journey. He can basically hear everyone who's calling for help. He can, integrate himself with all kinds of technology and look where someone is if he knows their smartphone number. He can find people easily once he does this and can help them. So he starts off saving, people from accidents. He stops crimes, saves, for example, a girl that is drugged and abducted by Yakuza, and kills all of them. Though he does it by accident, because his body goes into full self-defense overkill mode, which he doesn't really have control over at that moment. So, it was their fault for, trying to kill him. Wasn't really his decision. But yeah. Mm. He finds out that he can heal people from injuries and pretty much every disease in existence just by placing his hands on their bodies. So he goes around hospitals and cures people of cancer and such. He is being a model hero. And he's probably the thing I like most about the show. Ichiro is just a really swell dude. Like, he's just nice. He's a very nice person, and he's, what a hero should aspire to be. He has a shitty life, finds out he's about to die, gets into a freak accident by chance, and instead of, just making some money with his new ability to help only himself and his family, his first instinct is to help as many people as possible without asking for any reward or recognition or even a thank you. Every time someone says, "You are a hero, you're my savior," or "You must be a god," he just says, "Nah, I'm just an ordinary guy." He's great.
That's cool.
Yeah, he's just a super sympathetic main character. It's like, man, I like this guy. I would like this guy to be my grandpa. He is a cool dude. So yeah, and if the show would have been just about him, I would have had a super good time. Problem comes with the other part of the story that is often spent a lot more time on than on, Inuyashiki's story, and that is Hiro Shishigami. Hiro Shishigami is the villain of this tale, and he is pretty much the anti-Inuyashiki. He's a teenager in high school. He was at the park the same night as Ichiro. He got hit by the same explosion, and he got the same deadly cyborg body. However, what he decides to do with this body is completely different from what Ichiro does, because Hiro starts going around killing people at random. Oh. And since he's a walking, talking weapon of mass destruction, he basically just has to point his index finger at people, like a gun, and say bang, and they die, like being shot with a rifle. And he does that a lot. And why does he do that? Well, it's hinted at that Hiro has always had psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies, or was at least severely depressed, and maybe was in the park that night to kill himself. It's not quite clear in that regard, but, since his mind was transferred into a robot body, he seems to have lost any grasp on his humanity completely. And shortly after the accident in the park, he's walking around, not feeling like a human being anymore. Am I just a machine? Blah, blah, blah. Well, technically, he is not a human being anymore, but he's still got his mind and everything, and his memories and stuff like that. So does Inuyashiki, and he decides to do something else with his newfound power. So, anyway, what happens is Shishigami stands at a train station, and a man gets hit by a train in front of his eyes and dies. And that seems to be a theme with Oku's works. I'm looking at you, Gans. People getting hit, lots of people getting hit by a train, or the main characters getting hit by a train there too, by a subway train. So yeah, when Shishigami sees that guy dying, it makes him feel alive and human again, because he's still around and that guy is dead. Apparently, that's the reasoning. But yeah, that's what he feels, apparently. And because he yearns for that feeling, he takes it on himself to bring that feeling back to him as often as he can by killing people himself. So yeah, which is of course super twisted and super fucked up, and a stark contrast to Inuyashiki, who only felt really human for the first time in his life, or at least a long while, after helping that man in the park, after becoming a machine, because he didn't have any self-respect before. He didn't have any self-recognition. He, he doesn't have any friends. He wasn't really talking to anyone. Like I said, his family didn't like him much. He didn't know what to do with himself. And after getting that body and the power and a new lease on life, and helping that man who thanks him immediately, he feels like, oh, I finally feel human again. He breaks out in tears, because, this is the first time that he feels alive again in a long while. And there's a super moving scene. It's fantastic. And it's like the complete opposite to what Hiro does to feel kind of human again. So the show does a pretty good job at displaying how this kind of fantastic experience can have completely opposite effects depending on the people it happens to. So that's pretty neat. Like, setting up this contrast in the beginning, I thought that was a good thing, was interesting. Now, if they had stuck with giving Hiro, Hiro being a straightforward, cold-blooded, psychopathic killer and giving him like 1 or 2 episodes and then pit him against Ichiro at the end of the show, this would have been fine. The problem is how much time the show spends on Hiro Shishigami. After he committed the first set of murders, something happens that makes like Hiro reconsider for a short while, and he maybe would have stopped killing more people if the police weren't on his trail at this point. And of course, shit escalates, and something happens to an important person, and Hiro completely loses his shit and declares war on the whole city and goes on a rampage of catastrophic proportions.
God damn.
Yeah, and during all of that, especially because it spent so much time on him, it really felt like the show was trying to make us see things from Hiro's perspective and get some sympathies for him, which I could not muster up at all. Like, we see the police getting more and more ruthless. You know, that's how the show is trying to get us on his side, I feel like. We see the police getting more ruthless to a ridiculous degree, even towards innocent bystanders. We see Hiro go after assholes on social media who he deems responsible for what happens to one of his family members. And yeah, all of these people are assholes in this story, and some of that social commentary and criticism couldn't ring more true, especially in current day. But that doesn't change the fact that Hiro is a fucking psychopath who killed at least dozens of innocent people before all of this happened. And when he still had the chance to turn himself in and not resist, when, you know, the police was still trying to apprehend him and imprison him and not kill him yet, for, you know, good reasons, he didn't turn himself in. He didn't surrender. He didn't try to, you know, get help. And I mean, in the very beginning, you could make a point for him being a member of society who didn't get the help he needed and was left alone, kinda. And like, he wasn't responsible for becoming a living weapon. That's true. That's the, you know, weird sci-fi aspect of the show among, you know, the cyborg bodies and everything. That it's like the aliens pretty much responsible for this shit. But, you know, I think by the point in the show where he has killed half the city, working on giving that guy a, you know, fucking redemption arc is totally moot. Like, yeah, why are you still doing that? And yet the show like seems to want to do that, which just didn't work for me at all. At the end of the show, he says the words, and I shit you not, "Wait, I am the villain?" And I yelled at my TV, "Yeah, no shit, fuckhead." Like, I mean, it's terrifying all in itself that he didn't recognize his deeds as the truly villainous and being the bad guy, and, you know, speaks for his psychopathic tendencies and everything. But my suspense of disbelief can only go so far. Like, I mean, if you show your villain in the first couple of episodes shooting an entire innocent family, a father who takes a bath with his little kid who, when shot by Hiro, falls on his son and fucking drowns him in the bathtub. When you show me all of that, you kind of have your villain set in stone and made him an irredeemable monster. Like, no question about it. I mean, you can't pedal back from that. There's no way. Seriously. And all of that cruel, violent nonsense takes so much time away from, you know, getting to learn more about Inuyashiki and his family, which I really cared about and which I wanted to know more about and see more screen time of, and I didn't get that. And then that really pissed me off after a while. We spent way too much time with Hiro Shishigami, really. And I mean, they're building another connection between Ichiro and Shishigami by making Hiro's friend Ando Inuyashiki's sidekick, which was pretty cool, to be fair. He helps Ichiro getting a grip on his powers and find more people in need and everything. He, you know, helps him understand the tech behind everything, and how to properly control his weapons so that the shit with the Yakuza doesn't happen again when, you know, innocent bystanders are in range or something. So, but again, that connection in the beginning is used to give Hiro an anchor to society that he seems to care about. In fact, they do that multiple times with different people during the course of the show. But then he doesn't properly act on those connections that seem to matter to him, even if those people ask him to do the right thing. So, fuck Hiro Shishigami. Like, seriously, fuck that guy. He's like a really shitty person. And why are we spending that much time in the show on that dude? Like, and why are you trying to raise any kind of sympathy for him? And also the whole thing paints Inuyashiki in a bad light in the end too, which was really disappointing because it takes him and Ando way too long to get their shit together and try to stop that piece of garbage hero. I mean, I get that Ichiro is really inexperienced, but read the room, man. Like, when there's a guy who is, like, killing people and you're still staring at the screen wondering, what am I gonna do? Like, you do everything you can to find that fucker and bring him in. And if you can't, then end him. Like, Inuyashiki's hesitation at the end was, I don't know, really damning. And that was kind of disappointing for me too. And again, as with many series, the problem of this one, I think, is its lack of focus. Like, it should have been about Inuyashiki because he's the hero and, you know, his is the most important story. I get what they were doing with the contrast and everything. And, you know, pitting like this similar, you know, people who go through the similar experience but come from completely different ends of social spectrum and different age and everything and different experiences and their lives up till now, and then showing what that kind of power does to them. I think that's a good starting point. That's interesting. It just feels like they did a way too good job to paint Hiro as a monster. Like, devoid of any emotions in the beginning, and all of its attempts of redemption or redistributing the blame for the situation to other parties fell completely flat for me. They tried to give the villain deaths, failed, and wasted all the time they could have used to make the hero more interesting, who is, like I said, a really cool and nice guy. But, you know, his character growth in, you know, the entirety of the show is pretty straightforward, and I would have liked to see him interact more with the people in his life and what problems his new identity would have caused in that regard and everything, and we don't get that. Most of the time is spent on him learning the powers, helping some people, or showing some people, and all the other stuff we see is fucking hero killing people, then briefly reconsidering, then getting more mad at other people and killing all of them, and then eventually coming, you know, to the to his resolution that everyone, the entirety of the society and the city is to blame, and if the whole world is against him, so he has to kill the whole world. And that's just dumb.
Yeah, the extreme ends of the spectrum in this show, it sounds like, how can I word this? It sounds like it's a whiplash going back and forth, basically.
Yeah, it is. And it just doesn't work.
Yeah, the whole I'm the villain thing you point out is like,
Yeah. Yeah. That was crazy.
I mean, I get that in the heat of the moment, your perspective on your actions might not line up with that of others, but, you know, there's obviously a tipping point where, yes, you should recognize this.
Yeah, and it also doesn't fit together because Hiro has a very cold and machine-like demeanor, you know, probably even before, or at least it's hinted at, before he had his machine body. But he seems very cold and collected. For him to then overreact so very much, you can't really attribute that to heat of the moment things because he doesn't really do that stuff. So why would he be overwhelmed by emotion if he doesn't usually do emotions? So it feels like, okay, he is this giant, crazy, psychopathic asshole who just, gets the neck out of killing because it makes him feel like a human being. And then he tries to shift the blame for the shit that happens to him to other people. And if you still try to paint him as a person that is misunderstood at this point, and, after all the shit he pulls, trying to give him kind of a redemption scene, which they do in the very last episode, I felt like all of this was just, completely misplaced and didn't work. I think I get what they were doing with the series. Oku's the whole world sucks and pretty much everyone is an asshole attitude is almost more prevalent in this than in Guns. But, it just felt like they should have either concentrated on the main character, made Shishigami a terrifying one-note powerhouse villain with only 1 or 2 episodes, elaborating on his origin and everything, and what his deal is. Or if they had to go the other way, at least given him some redeeming qualities so that the audience has at least something to sympathize with. But the way the story went, I only felt sorry for the people in his life, never for Hiro himself. Or maybe that was the point after all, I don't know. All I know is ultimately this show was a letdown. And that's a wrap on the 45th episode of Anime Brain Freeze. All the music in our show is from the Double Dragon Neon soundtrack by the amazing Jack Kaufman. Please go to vrt.bandcamp.com and check out his awesome work. Our show is available on most of the popular podcast services, but it's always worth visiting animebrainfreeze.com for some interesting articles linked in our episode release posts. Follow us on Twitter at AnyBrainFreeze. We tweet regular updates and fun anime-related stuff there. Leave us comments and questions on Facebook and our YouTube channel, or send an email to animebrainfreeze@gmail.com. We would love to read your feedback. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you had a good time, and please join us again on our next show. Macht's gut.
So long, everybody.
Next time on Anime Brain Freeze.
We'll start you off with a 2-for-1 teen romance pack.
Also, Steven Universe the anime with CG that doesn't suck? Well, we'll see about that.
And then we're going to take a nice trip to a goofy maid cafe with more romance involved.